top 10 details of horrific murders already committed. It is easy to get desensitized to the thought of murdering someone. It's no longer rare to read about a horrific killing while eating breakfast and then move on to the sports or entertainment section, utterly forgetting that another family is grieving the loss of a loved one to a monster. A murder case, on the other hand, may have details that make it frighteningly real to those who read or hear about it, reminding us all that real-life monsters exist. Here are some chilling details about 11 murders that have already taken place. Number 10. Laughing while reporting murders. On January 26, 2015, several de Zal's Winelands Golf Estate residents in Stellenbosch, South Africa heard amplified voices coming from the Van Breda family property in the estate's center. Early the next morning, they watched as police and emergency services arrived at the residence. They later discovered that an axe-wielding intruder had killed 3 of the 5 family members. Marley had to be taken to the hospital and paramedics treated Henri, the youngest son, for superficial wounds. Soon after, Henri was apprehended and questioned. Marley was said to have experienced retrograde amnesia while being treated for significant head injuries at the hospital. The horrifying truth became obvious as more information about the fatalities became accessible. Henri was found to have a drug problem and was held at first because he was covered in the blood of both his parents and brother when the cops arrived. During questioning, he alleged that a black man using an axe had attacked his family. According to him, the figure was also wearing black clothing, gloves, and a balaclava. After Henry's trial began, prosecutors quickly discredited this claim, particularly after it was shown that Henri only called 911 more than 3 hours after his family had been attacked. Worst of all, according to the audio recording of the phone call, Henri laughed after saying, "My family and myself were attacked by a person with an axe." Henri Van Breda was found not guilty of the murders of his parents and brother, as well as the attempted murder of his sister. For the rest of his life, he was condemned to 3 periods of incarceration. Henri tried but failed to appeal his conviction and sentence in 2018. Number 9. The Other Side's Message. Nicole Utoft Atkinson reported Shanann Watts, a friend and colleague, and Watts' 2 daughters missing on August 13, 2018. Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant at the time, drove her home from a business trip later that day, skipping a doctor's visit. Nicole's text messages were unanswered by her. She called the cops after going to Shanann's house and getting no response after knocking and ringing the doorbell several times. Chris, Shanann's husband, was at work when Nicole informed him of the problem. When police arrived to do a welfare check, Shanann and her 2 daughters were nowhere to be located. Chris was on TV the next day pleading for his family's return. On August 15, 2018, Chris Watts was arrested and a polygraph test proved that he was lying. He then confessed to killing his wife. Shanann allegedly strangled their daughters to death after he told her he'd been having an affair and strangled her in wrath, according to him. Following that, the victims were transported to an oil storage facility where they were discovered on August 16. Chris was later identified as the assailant who suffocated his 2 daughters with a blanket. "I thought it would be easier to be with Nicole if Shanann wasn't pregnant," he claimed, alleging that he murdered his family in order to pursue his relationship with his lover. "I knew she'd keep me away from Nikki even if I took my hands off of her." Fans speculated on social media after a documentary about the killings appeared on Netflix in 2020 that Shanann was attempting to communicate with authorities from beyond the dead. Following an incident in which cops were provided CCTV footage, this happened. The TV screen depicts an image of a fetus and a skull floating in oil after the camera is turned off. Number 8. It was too cold outside to bury her. William Devin Howell, 44, discovered Janice Roberts was transgender on June 18, 2003, and murdered her after inviting her into his vehicle and tried to engage her in a sexual act. Howell had already murdered a 29-year-old woman, and after murdering Roberts, he went on to murder 5 more women before being captured. While awaiting his punishment, Howell told one of his cellmates that he considered himself as a sick ripper with a monster living inside him. Because it was too chilly outside to bury her, he allegedly admitted to keeping one of the women's bodies in his van for 2 weeks, sleeping next to her. Howell admits to chopping off her fingers and teeth as well as disposing her body parts in Virginia. Howell used the phrase "death machine" to describe his 1985 Ford Econoline. After being found guilty and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms, Howell told the court that he deserved the death penalty and apologized to the victims' families. Number 7. Inform the officers that something was stolen at 4 p.m. today. On April 6, 2009, Sandra Renee Cantu, an 8-year-old girl, was discovered in a suitcase at the bottom of an irrigation pond. After the pond was frequently drained, the tragic discovery was made. According to an autopsy, Sandra was sexually violated with a foreign object and strangled. In addition, alprazolam was identified in her system. Initially, the FBI thought they were looking for a Caucasian man with a history of child abuse. They then discovered that on the day Sandra went missing from another friend's house, the mother of one of Sandra's friends had sent a strange text to Sandra's mother. The text added, "Tell the cops that I had stuff taken today at 4 p.m. I'm not sure if that matters." The woman, Melissa Huckabee, was a Sunday school teacher. She returned to the police station the next day claiming she found a message on the ground that read, "Cantu imprisoned in stolen bag." They were tossed into the sea on Bucketty Road and Whitehall Road. Witness: one of Huckabee's suitcases was also stolen, she alleged. Huckabee was unaware that on the day Sandra vanished, March 27, 2009, CCTV footage captured her walking toward her home. 8 minutes later, Huckabee drove out in her SUV, and it was then that she called to report her suitcase missing. A former U.S. Marine and his wife observed her at the irrigation pond when she was away from home. She returned to the church after spending 30 minutes at the pond. When the FBI went to the church to investigate, they discovered a bloodied rolling pin that tested positive for Sandra's DNA. Huckabee was arrested and charged with murder in the first degree. To avoid the death penalty, she pled guilty and was sentenced to life in jail without the possibility of parole. Number 6. An unknown substance. When Joe Matheny's drug-addicted wife left him and took their son with her, he was enraged. He went on the hunt for them, scouring the highways and stopping at halfway houses. Matheny recalls his wife shooting up under a particular bridge in their neighborhood. He found 2 homeless men but no sign of his wife or son when he got at the bridge. After they failed to provide him with information about his family's whereabouts, Matheny assaulted and killed both homeless men with an axe. Despite the fact that he dumped the remains in a nearby river, he was apprehended and spent more than 2 years in jail awaiting trial. When Matheny's trial finally began, he was acquitted since there was no physical evidence that he had killed the men. He'd just recently been released from prison when he killed 2 prostitutes. He dismembered both of them and mixed their flesh with bacon and meat. He used this combination to make hamburger patties, which he sold over a few weekends. When Matheny was apprehended again, he told cops that no one had complained about the patties because the human body tastes fairly similar to pig. Joe Matheny was eventually condemned to 2 life sentences, but he died in his cell in 2017. Number 5. I'm upside down in the center of a wall. When Annie La, 24, went missing from a Yale University lab in 2009, she was due to marry in 5 days. Her body was discovered inside the lab building where she was last seen on the day of her wedding. Her skeleton was stuffed inside an upside-down wall. Officers on the scene were taken aback by how terribly her body had been smashed up to the point where she was virtually unrecognizable. According to the investigation, Aniela had been strangled and her attacker had broken her jaw and collarbone while she was still alive. Ray Clark, a lab worker, was arrested and charged with Annie's murder very soon. He claimed he was angry with Annie because she had left filthy mouse cages in the lab after a research project and he had sent her a scathing email about it. He is also thought to have attacked her as a result of this. Clark received a 44-year sentence, but the motive for the attack was never established. Number 4. With the potential to kill, a security system has been developed. The BTK killer killed 10 people over the span of 20 years. Dennis Rader's initial victims were 4 members of the same family. He broke into the Otero family's home on January 15, 1974 and tied them up. He masturbated while they struggled to breathe inside the plastic bags he'd put around their heads. He imprisoned Shirley Vian Relford's 3 children in the family's lavatory before killing her in March 1977. In a letter to a Wichita radio station in 1978, Rader admits to killing 7 people when he was overconfident. He even called 911 to report the murder of 25-year-old Nancy Fox in 1977, writing 2 poems about it and mailing them to the press. Rader would take personal belongings from his victims, put them on himself, and take selfies with them. On occasion, he would hang himself from a tree or bury himself in the ground. Dennis Rader began killing again 7 years after Nancy Fox's death. He kept in touch with the officers as well as the media. After delivering a floppy disk to yet another TV station, he was finally captured and detectives discovered information on the disk that revealed the BTK killer's first name. He was prosecuted and convicted to 10 consecutive life sentences. Dennis Rader worked for the security firm ADT in 1974, installing alarm systems in homes throughout Wichita, particularly for families who were scared of being assaulted by the BTK killer. It was revealed during the trial. Number 3. Highways are horrible. California's freeways are used by millions of people every day. Most motorists, on the other hand, may be completely oblivious that they are driving over the graves of many children. Mac Ray Edwards is suspected of kidnapping and murdering up to 22 children, burying the majority of his victims beneath California highways. In June 1953, Stella Darlene Nolan, then 8 years old, was with a friend at the Auction City Flea Market while her mother worked at a sandwich stand nearby. Stella had been instructed to phone her mother every hour, which she did until 8 p.m. Stella's mother, Elena, frantically searched the flea market for her daughter when 9 p.m. arrived. When she couldn't find her, she called the cops. When they arrived, she told them about an odd conversation she had a week before with a man who told Elena she had a lovely daughter and asked, "Is there any chance of kidnapping, buying, or stealing her?" The authorities immediately initiated an investigation, but they were unable to locate the young child. Following Stella's disappearance, more children went missing, including 12-year-old Branda Howell, 13-year-old Don Baker, 8-year-old Thomas Bowman, and 6-year-old Bruce Kremen. When Mac Ray Edwards was captured and accused with many murders, he admitted to the majority of them, telling officials that he had murdered several of his victims beneath highways, particularly the Santa Ana and Ventura freeways. After killing Stella Nolan, he acknowledged to rapping, strangling, and dumping her body over a bridge. When he returned to the spot where he had left her, he discovered her alive and sitting up. When she tried to run, he stabbed her to death. In March 1970, a highway worker discovered Stella's bones after Edwards gave them directions. Edwards, a heavy machine operator and highway construction worker, committed suicide in his prison cell in 1971. Number 2. Player in the National Football League. Sherry Hull, then 20 years old, was assaulted by a man who had gained entrance to the building where she worked on January 18, 1981. As he walked another young employee, Lisa Garcia, down a hall with a gun to her back, he noticed her. After sexually assaulting both women, he shot them in the back of the head. Sherry died on the spot, while Lisa claimed to be dead. As soon as the man left, Lisa called the cops and they drove right past the killer on their way to the crime site. He'd killed other people before he got to Sherry and Lisa, and investigators were certain it was the same person. While they tried to track down the serial killer with Lisa's help, he continued to kill. After Lisa recognized Randall Brent Woodfield in a photo lineup, he was captured and convicted for his crimes. He was found guilty of 1 killing and 1 attempted homicide, although he has been linked to several additional homicides. He is still on the run for the killings of up to 44 people. During the investigation, it was determined that Woodfield was drafted by the Green Bay Packers in 1974. He was quickly kicked off the team after being caught several times for indecent exposure. Number 1. Steps away from home are becoming extinct. On April 13, 2011, Holly Bobo, a 20-year-old nursing student still living at home, vanished from her own backyard. Karen, Holly's mother, had gotten a call from a neighbor while she was at work that morning saying she'd heard someone screaming near Karen's house. Karen dialed her phone number and her son Clint answered. She inquired as to how things were at home and whether Holly had returned to campus. Karen sensed something was wrong when Clint claimed Holly's car was still parked in the driveway. After Karen hung up to call the cops, Clint went into the kitchen. When he peeked out the window, he saw his sister with a man dressed in camouflage who he assumed was Holly's boyfriend, Drew Scott. Karen called home again after being unable to contact the cops. When Clint told Karen Drew was outside, she instructed him to shoot the man with Holly since she knew Drew was somewhere else. Clint was stumped and didn't want to shoot anyone, so he called out to Drew and Holly, but neither of them responded. Holly and the man then vanished into the woods behind the house, which he spotted. At this point, he seized his handgun and went outside. The first police cars came at the house as he looked at the blood on the ground near Holly's car. On April 14, rescuers discovered Holly's lunchbox, a piece of paper with her name written on it and a pair of pink women's underwear. Holly Bobo's body was recovered in a bucket in the woods on September 18, 2014. A gunshot had struck her in the back of the head. 6 men were charged with Holly's murder at first, with 3 of them also facing aggravated kidnapping and rape charges. In September 2017, Zach Adams was sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. After his brother Dylan was sentenced to 35 years in prison, Jason Autry accepted a plea agreement that reduced his sentence to 8 years. Autry will be published in September 2020.